What if the Milky Way still remembers the scream of its first dying star? Hold that question like a stone in your hand and do not throw it away. Because I am about to read you a page from a journal that the galaxy itself might have kept. Written not in ink but in ripples of light and particles that move across time like letters on an endless tide. Imagine sitting beside an old instrument, a listening dish that hears in frequencies and in tides. And imagine that every pulse it records is the voice of something that lived, burned, and changed the shape of everything around it. The entry I read now begins with a memory older than any language we speak. In the moment a massive star reached its last breath, there was not only a flash of light but a breaking of a long-held silence. The explosion tore the star into filaments of color and metal that arced outward. And those filaments carved signatures into surrounding clouds. For a long time the record looked like noise. It looked like broken glass. But we learned to listen to the pattern. To find in the debris a sentence that reads across light years. The supernova remnant is more than scattered dust. It is a ledger line that tells us where heavy elements first rose to matter. Where oxygen and iron were seeded into future planets. Where the raw vocabulary of life was cast into the interstellar wind. The waves we pick up are not all light. Some are charged particles riding magnetic fields. Some are ripples of radio emission that hum with a frequency set by electrons spiraling around unseen fields. Some are faint afterglows in X-ray that last longer than the flash that made them. Each frequency is a different script written at different times. But taken together they form a coherent narrative of birth, death, and the slow rearrangement of everything between the stars. Between those entries are the cosmic rays, messengers of violence that travel almost at light speed. They are fragments from ancient explosions and perhaps from collisions of compact objects. When they pierce our instruments they arrive with a jitter of memory. Their energy's a code of age and provenance. If you could read their energy spectrum as one reads a handwriting style you would learn the hand that wrote them. Whether it was a type of supernova that favored iron-rich shrapnel or a long-ago gamma-ray event that flung particles at extremes beyond our routine imagination. The journal keeps margins where magnetic filaments scribble marginalia. Where shock waves compress clouds until gravity takes a breath and forms the first seeds of stars to come. Remnants are not isolated relics. They touch the interstellar medium. They push on cold gas, igniting new pockets of creation. They whisper to molecular clouds and plant the conditions for the next chapters of stellar life. In that way the death of one star becomes a preface to another story and the journal reads itself as an ongoing cycle. Somewhere inside the pages are lines written in the language of isotopes. Radioactive elements forged in supernova furnaces decay quietly and leave behind daughters that act like timestamps. Tell me the ratios and I will mark the page to a date. Tell me the distribution and I will tell you about mixing, about turbulence, about the fingerprints of past chaos smoothed by the slow passage of time. There is tenderness in that decay because it is the galaxy's method of dating its own wounds and learning how to heal. Then there are the whispers of ancient high-energy events. Perhaps born of the collapse of massive stars or the rare dance of neutron stars crashing together. Those events leave behind a chorus in gamma rays and in short-lived transients. They write sudden, sharp sentences that stand out in the journal like exclamation marks. When we trace them back they point to particular neighborhoods of the galaxy. To crowded stellar nurseries and to lonely, older corners where a pair of compact objects finally gave up their orbit. The journal notes the neighborhoods where violence was frequent and those where it was rare. It traces not just endings but the geography of life and death. The neighborhoods that will become rich in planets and those that are barren. As the entries march on, the cosmic background of radio waves keeps a steady margin note, a fabric that remembers large-scale structure and the slow drift of gas between spiral arms. This background hum is not dramatic like an explosion, but it is persistent and it is honest. It tells of the galaxy breathing, of arms sweeping through, of star formation rates rising and falling like tides. It holds the record of an entire population of past generations, of small stars that simmered and of large ones that detonated. Reading this hum you begin to see the rhythm, the cadence of how the galaxy renews itself. There is also the insistent, ghostly trace of ancient magnetic fields, a kind of invisible handwriting that shapes the motion of charged particles and channels the flow of cosmic weather. Fields fold and tangle, they hold the memory of turbulent eras when matter flowed like a river splashing stones against its banks. A field that was stretched by an old shock remembers the direction and intensity of that push. When electrons dance along that field they create polarized light that we can decode as a directional accent. A slant in the script that tells us who pushed whom and when. These are subtle clues but together they scaffold the narrative that supernova remnants begin. All of this is read from the perspective of waves because waves carry the memory that matter cannot. Light can cross vast emptiness and arrive intact. Particles travel and arrive scarred but intelligible. Even in the silence between events there are traces. There are cold clouds that seem empty until you look at trace molecules and find histories of past irradiation and gentle heating. There are filamentary structures that map the drag of past flows. The journal likes to place metaphorical stamps at the bottom of pages, signatures of turbulence, of shock heating, of chemical enrichment. As the pages go on, the entries change tone. The earliest pages describe rare cataclysms and their immediate aftermath. Later pages become busier. Stellar populations multiply. Supernovae no longer stand as solo poems but as a chorus. Their combined voices overlap and create a background of relic emission that is harder to parse but richer in information. Patterns emerge in the overlapping echoes. Clusters of remnants near one another reveal episodes of clustered star formation, where entire groups of massive stars were born together and died within a short time. Those clusters leave the galaxy changed. Gas is stripped away. New dynamics emerge. The journal records not just physical change but causality. It shows how one generation shapes the conditions for the next. Sometimes nurturing, sometimes sterilizing, always influencing. The emotional heart of the journal, the charging point toward which all lines converge, is the knowledge that these violent ends are not meaningless. They are the chapters that produce metals and complexity in environments where planets form. Somewhere in that folding of pages, in that messy scrawl, is the possibility of life. The galaxy keeps this with an almost maternal ambivalence. It writes the recipe and then steps back to see what cooks. And finally, the voice of the journal grows intimate. It speaks of timing, of chance alignments where the right elements arrived in the right cloud at the right epoch. It tells of small things like the injection of short-lived isotopes into a protoplanetary disk and how that tiny addition could change the chemistry of emergent worlds. It admits the violence of selective survival. It is at once proud and regretful, a catalogue of necessity and grace. The climax of what I read now comes when the entries begin to fold in on themselves. The local neighborhood of a long-dead supernova remnant interacts with the wake left by a passing spiral arm. Magnetic fields reconnect, shocks collide, the noise becomes coherent for a moment, and the journal calls this a revelation. In that instant, something new forms, a star cluster with the precise conditions to seed rocky planets. The text here is terse, like a whispered exclamation, and an emotional clarity settles in. Endings create beginnings, and the memory of destruction is the substrate of creation. You have waited for the answer to the question that opened this reading. Here it is, plainly and fully. Yes, in the language of waves, the Milky Way does remember the scream of its first dying star. It remembers not as a single echo that repeats endlessly, but as a layered archive written across frequencies and particles. The scream is preserved in the geometry of filaments, in the chemistry of clouds, in the distribution of isotopes, in the background hum of radio emission, and in the tiny pushes that guide the birth of future stars. To listen to that record is to read the galaxy's oldest confidences. To feel the memory is to understand that every flash of light that once screamed into void was not simply an end but the beginning of a sentence that might, billions of years later, include us.